This time last year I was out for a walk with friends. As we walked past some houses undergoing refurbishment, the conversation turned to housing and how new homes measured up to the ongoing energy transition. We wondered whether the homes being built today are ready for the future, or whether there would need to be retrofits to them to make them suitable for living in an electric future. I wondered what requirements were being placed on new homes, whether there was any legislation that might result in them being ready for that future out of the box, or whether there was still a disconnect between what people need and what was being built. Today's video aims to answer that question. Are new homes required to have solar? How are they to be heated? And are they ready for people to have EVs without modification? Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. Thanks for joining me on the electric transition. As I mentioned at the start there, today I intend to summarise what I have found regarding the requirements for new build homes in the UK and whether they are fit for an electric future. In the UK, the 2008 Climate Change Act puts in place a framework for reducing the country's overall CO2 emissions. It doesn't try to specify exact emissions requirements by year, but does recognise the need to determine a trajectory that is clear and measurable. We can't leave reaching its goals to chance. There needs to be some management of the progress towards that end goal. The framework specifies how intermediary targets will be set, how progress towards them will be monitored, and who is ultimately responsible for achieving them. The point of the Act was to make sure that emissions reductions were achieved, and a pillar of the Act was the need to inform government policies, with each department taking on their role of planning reductions from the sector for which they were responsible. Just a few weeks ago, we got the latest figures on the UK's sources of emissions split by sector. The largest, at 31%, is domestic transport, some parts of which I address in some detail on the channel. But the second highest is buildings and product uses, currently accounting for 22% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. That's quite a big source that we need to tackle. If we look at the text of the latest report, it says that the emissions in this sector were primarily caused by fuel combustion in buildings, with 2/3 of these emissions coming from residential buildings, in other words, our homes. So the 2008 Climate Change Act makes clear that policies must be changed to reduce emissions, and the statistics all say that our homes are part of the problem. So where are the policies that are going to drive change? This is a big problem. We have a huge existing housing stock that needs to be changed, but surely we shouldn't make the problem worse by building new homes that don't tackle this at source. Well, there was a bit of a plan. A policy was intended to stop that very problem. There was agreement that new homes should not be built with gas boilers from 2025. However, in September 2023, Rishi Sunak threw that plan into doubt, stating that the policy for changing boilers in homes was unfair, as it would push too much cost onto families already struggling to make ends meet. But the good news is that in March 2026, the government published updates to the Building Regulations Part L, which place specific requirements on the carbon emissions from new homes in England. The regulations do not pick a winner in terms of the heating system. That's not their job to do that. But the limits on emissions from the heating system are set so low that only heat pumps and heating networks are expected to meet the requirements. Gas boilers are allowed in existing homes that are having major refurbishments and are therefore covered by the regulations, but there is no wording that in any way suggests they can be used in new homes. These updates are the result of several rounds of consultation, which were all carried out under the moniker the Future Homes Standard. Parts F and L of the building regulations effectively are the Future Homes Standard after the updates, but aren't really called that as such. The newly updated regulations come into force on the 24th of March 2027 for regular works and 6 months later for higher risk building works. However, there is a transitionary period of a year in which building works can be started using existing plans without those plans needing to be changed to comply with the new regulations. The new regulations actually bring multiple changes. Not only is heating affected, but homes must have on-site electricity generation, which, if solar, must have an area of at least 40% of the ground floor plan to ensure that it's not a token gesture. There are also updated requirements around air tightness, as well as around ventilation, to ensure that the increased air tightness requirements do not result in damp or mould. However, you'll notice that I didn't mention anything about EV charging. That had me worried. Surely they should be mandating EV charging of some form in new homes. Well, it turns out that I missed that. It wasn't a part of the Future Homes Standard because it's already a requirement. Part S of the building regulations specifies the details of that obligation and came into force in June 2022. Part S states that there must be access to a minimum of one charge point for every home, or all associated parking must offer charging if there are fewer parking spaces than homes. There is a cost cap specified of £3,600 per charge point connection. That cap limits the liability for the builder in some circumstances, but requires additional charge points be made available when prices allow. In other words, there should be more than one if that can be done within that amount. If an overrun on the cost takes it above the cap and causes charge points to be left out, then as a minimum, the cable route for one must be provided to make it easy to retrofit one at a later date. This applies to all new residential buildings, but also applies in the case of a material change of use of existing buildings and to major renovations of large sites with more than 10 parking spaces, such as large blocks of flats. There are also requirements for non-residential buildings, such as in commercial settings, if they have more than 10 parking spaces. They must have at least one charge point, as well as cable routes provided for 20% of the total number of spaces. It's these regulations we see in action when we visit new build sites. As we look around the new homes under construction, we see charge points on all of the ones with associated parking. This applies whether it's a house or indeed a block of flats with a parking area with allocated parking for them. There they are, look, one on each space in this case. Building regulations are devolved, and therefore Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own regulations, although they all seem to be following a fairly similar path, sometimes ahead of England and occasionally behind them. In Scotland, the emissions requirements of new homes are generally stricter than those in England, and an update in 2028 aims to improve energy efficiency yet further. An amendment to the Scottish building regulations came into force on the 1st of April 2024, based largely on a consultation that went under the name New Build Heat Standard 2024, and requires that new homes use only zero direct emissions heating systems. Like England, they haven't chosen a winner in terms of heating system technologies, but they have effectively chosen losers by not allowing anything that emits on site, with the desire being zero carbon homes, or as close as can sensibly be achieved. Meanwhile, builders of new homes in Scotland have been required to fit charge points since June 2023. That's a done deal for them too. A new set of buildings regulations come into force in Wales in March 2027, as part of which they too will mandate the installation of an electricity generation system, the broad requirements of which seem to be similar to those I've already discussed regarding England. Their energy efficiency requirements for heating and hot water also seem to require very low carbon emissions, such that gas and oil boilers are not going to be capable of achieving the emissions required there either. The Welsh Government initiated a consultation on the installation of charge points on new homes back in 2024, but as far as I can see, there is not yet a requirement there. The building regulations in Northern Ireland are detailed in a series of technical booklets, with the sections on carbon emissions last updated in June 2022. I found technical booklet F1 a little difficult to navigate for some reason, struggling to find the actual emissions limits. However, there is a reference to the need for a new build to be nearly zero energy in nature. What exactly that means, what limits apply to that measurement, I didn't manage to understand in the time available, but it certainly sounds good. I also couldn't find much about the need to provide EV charging in Northern Ireland. A summary on the Certified Installer website, which brings together the requirements of the nations when it comes to EV charging, seems to confirm that this is not a requirement there yet. I have only talked about the UK thus far. Doing the same again for other countries might be interesting to compare and contrast where we are in relation to them, or the other way around. I'm not sure how much interest there will be for this video, and therefore how a similar review of other countries might be received. Therefore, if you'd like to see that, then drop me a comment saying so, and perhaps consider subscribing so you don't miss it. If it seems to be of interest to enough people, I'll fit that into the schedule. So, if we review my initial question regarding whether new homes are being built ready for an electric future, then for the UK at least, it seems the answer is yes, or nearly in some instances. Building regulations are devolved to the four nations of the UK, which makes understanding the information a little bit more difficult, but we're certainly getting there. On-site generation is a requirement in England and Wales. It makes less sense for Scotland, so they haven't mandated this, as it would be a bit less useful there. Northern Ireland do not mandate generation, but sometimes it is installed to help meet code. When it comes to heating, England and Wales introduce very strict emissions targets next year, which are unlikely to be met via anything other than heat pumps or heat networks. In Northern Ireland, I found the legislation a little more difficult to fathom, but there is a reference to a new building being nearly zero energy, and it's thought that the fossil fuel powered heating systems are increasingly hard to fit into the overall emissions requirements. However, Scotland have gone furthest in this regard in their new regulations, in that they require heating systems to have zero direct emissions, so gas and oil are out of the picture there for sure. When it comes to EV charging, this is now a requirement in most cases in England and Scotland. Wales have carried out a consultation, but I don't think it's been mandated yet. Northern Ireland haven't anything in place in this regard as far as I can see. So I'd say that we largely have new builds showing the direction of travel. Regulations are generally minimising the home's carbon emissions so as to avoid a need to retrofit those as well as all of the existing buildings. That's at least something. Thanks very much to those people who have shown their support for the channel by using the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description. That is very much appreciated, and the link is there again for anyone else who would like to do so. Well, that's all I have this time out. Now over to you. I look forward to your questions and comments on this latest topic in the comments section. Tell me, did you know about the regulations for new builds in your nation if you are based in the UK? Or do you know what your country mandates if you are outside of it? I'd love to know about the situation in other countries, so let me know what you are aware of in the comments section. Remember that it's Everything Electric North in Harrogate next week on the 8th and 9th of May. If you are going, keep an eye out for community posts on the channel just before and during the event. Once I've sussed the layout and the timing of the sessions, I'll let everyone know a meeting point and time for each day in case you'd like to meet me or one another. If you've liked the video, then it's a big help to me if you click the thumbs up button, and I'd love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Subscribing is free and helps ensure you know about any future videos I make. Thanks.